Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's webinar, An Ocean of Untapped Talent, Investing in Black and Latinx Women Founders. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Wendy Maldonado D'Amico. I'm Yale College class of 1993 and a director of Accelerate Yale and Yale Angels. Our discussion is co-sponsored by the Yale Black Alumni Association, the Yale Latino Alumni Network, and Yale Women, and made possible by the Yale Alumni Association shared interest groups. Accelerate Yale is a global community of alumni and friends of Yale who are engaged in innovation, tech, and entrepreneurship. Please note that we are being recorded this evening with all participants muted. Tonight's session will be 1 hour, and we will reserve the last 25 minutes for your questions. If you have a question that you'd like to submit, you can do so via the Q&A button at the bottom bar of your screen. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our featured speaker and our moderator for this evening. First, our moderator. Gary Stewart is Yale class of 96, JD 99 from the law school. He is the CEO and founder of Founder Tribes, an app that gamifies founder education and provides access to mentors and fundraising. He is the former CEO and co-founder of The Nest, a mobile app that could be called a masterclass for founders. From 2014 to 2019, Gary was the director of Wyra UK, a corporate accelerator backed by Telefonica. From 2010 to 2014, Gary was an associate professor of entrepreneurship at IE Business School in Madrid and CEO of Wyra Spain. He launched his first startup in 2005. Before becoming an entrepreneur, Gary worked as a lawyer in the US, UK, and Spain. He graduated magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa from Yale College, and was the executive editor of the Yale Law Journal at Yale Law School. He is a governor of the University of East London and has been on the power list of the most influential Black people in the UK. He is a member of the leadership teams of Accelerate Yale and Yale Angels. And next, our featured speaker for this evening is Kathryn Finney. She is a class of 2000 graduate of the Yale School of Public Health. Over the last 10 years, Kathryn has made her mark as a tech entrepreneur, social media visionary, investor, writer, and television correspondent. In April of 2020, Kathryn founded the Dooney Fund, which provides micro investments to over 1,500 Black women-owned businesses. An echoing Green Global Fellow and Eisenhower Fellow, Kathryn founded Digital Undivided in 2013 after selling her company, The Budget Fashionista, one of the very first lifestyle blogs. Digital Undivided is a social enterprise that fosters economic growth through the empowerment of Black and Latina women entrepreneurs, and it has raised over $100 million in investments. She is a former general partner in the Harriet Fund, which was the first venture capital fund focused on Black and Latinx women founders. Her pioneering research, #ProjectDiane, drew widespread buzz for disrupting the dialogue around women of color and tech entrepreneurship. I'd also like to note that Kathryn is a wife and a mother, just like I am. Kathryn, it's an honor for Accelerate Yale to host you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And now I'm going to turn it over to Gary. Gary.
Thank you, Wendy, as always, for a brilliant introduction. And thank you, Kathryn, for joining us. Since you're an entrepreneur and I'm an entrepreneur always, I kind of want to ask you, Wendy did a really brilliant description of who you are. But if you had to kind of pitch yourself, imagine you're just meeting President Obama. How would you describe yourself? What's your 1-minute pitch?
Awesome. Well, I actually got to meet President Obama. So this is the exercise of remembering what I said to him. I'm a builder. I love to build things. It could be an irrigation system for my backyard during COVID, one of my mini COVID projects. I'm sure many people can relate to that. It could be children and family. I'm a mother. I like to build companies. It is sort of the thing I've been doing my entire life. I built my first true company in the 4th grade. It was a lucrative friendship bracelet business. I cornered the market in Minneapolis. And, you know, have built several businesses since then, many of which have become successful. And so if I had to describe myself, it really is a builder. And I'm so excited to be here to talk to other members of the Yale community about building. I think we're at a moment in history as entrepreneurs, as people who are fans of innovation, excited about innovation, in which we really need builders. We need builders, we need ideas, we need innovation right now more than probably any other time in recent history. So it's exciting to be in this space.
I think, and what's really interesting about that is that you kind of have this very expansive definition of entrepreneurship, even kind of going beyond entrepreneurship to a mother can be entrepreneurial. And when I was reading kind of the Medium post that you did introducing the Dooney Fund, you start by highlighting your grandmother, who was a seamstress, but you also call her an entrepreneur. And I guess for a lot of people, they think like an entrepreneur is like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk. And there are lots of people like your grandmother or like, you and some of your other ventures that don't fit the pattern of like what an entrepreneur is. So what should we be thinking about these new ways of thinking about entrepreneurship? Do you think the definitions that we have right now are too restrictive towards technology and a certain sort of technology, or do you think that we need to be expanding it to this more, broader definition of builders and other folks like your grandmother, like Stacey Abrams, like Madam C.J. Walker, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it has been defined in the image of the people who have power and money, and not necessarily defined in the way that it really meant. I mean, you can think of Andrew Carnegie wasn't a coder, he was definitely a successful entrepreneur. Steve Jobs actually couldn't really write code. It was Wozniak who did, right? And so you wouldn't say he wasn't an entrepreneur. I think what has happened is that we've had these rigid definitions to almost exclude certain groups of people. Really, an entrepreneur is someone who monetizes their idea for themselves, basically, that takes their own idea to market and receives the benefit of it. And my grandmother was definitely that person. She had a successful seamstress business in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She did her own books. She, definitely provided a service, provided product, and got paid for it. And I grew up seeing that. I had a firsthand sort of front row seat to her as a businesswoman, and it had an impact on me. I saw a woman create something and get paid for it. And that, is the essence of entrepreneurship. And it's people like my grandmother, it's other people who we all know in our family. We all have, a cousin that does hair, someone once told me they had an uncle down the street who like did cars, like he really worked at the post office, but he also did cars and had a little side business. He became everyone's guy, and have a guy that could do cars. That is entrepreneurship. This is people who are monetizing their labor, monetizing their work, and it has great value. And I think as a country, it is those people who have built the foundation for the Mark Zuckerberg, for the other people to succeed.
Yeah, and I think it's, I was reading this Kaufman study recently for some other purpose. And I found that like in the US, only about 10% of entrepreneurs are actually tech entrepreneurs, that 90% are basically these other folks that kind of get ignored by Silicon Valley and venture capital. And I think when you were starting your first company, it wasn't like the traditional tech company. It was like a fashion related business. And I read that when you went to an incubator, you said that in Minnesota, you were used to being one of the few, but when you went to like a startup incubator, that's when you kind of felt like invisible, like people didn't really have any expectations of you. Can you help us to unpack that? Like, what did you mean that you felt invisible in a way that you hadn't felt in Minnesota?
Yeah, I grew up in Minnesota in the 90s. There's this joke about Minnesota that there's only 2 Black people, like Kirby Puckett and Prince. I can tell you there was more than 2 Black people. There was at least 6 because my family was there. But I was often in rooms where I was the only person of color. And I think many of us have experienced that. But I was never made to feel that I had to be less than. I was never made to feel that people didn't think that I was going to be great. And it wasn't until I got into the tech space, in the startup space in particular, in which I was in situations where people just didn't think I could do something because of my race and gender. It had no other basis other than that. And to me, it was at first really demoralizing because it's like, I mean, I did all these things. I'm great. I'm an overachiever. Hey, look at me. And then you literally don't think I can do anything based upon what you see. You haven't even talked to me yet. And that was really, really difficult. And it was really, really eye-opening. And it was a tough time. I mean, I remember one time I pitched my idea, this was in 2009. And I had this idea to do sort of a beauty tech company for Black women. Black women purchase over 40% of all the hair products in the United States. We're about 7% of the US population, but we purchase almost half of all the hair products, right? So it's this captive market of people who you don't even have to advertise. Like, we know we need to get our hair done. That's just something we automatically do. So from a business, this is like brilliant, right? You have this captive market. No one's really doing anything with it. At the time, I was a correspondent on the Today Show. I was on TV. I had this platform. I mean, this was like great, right? And it was the first time where people hadn't even felt to Google me. So I did this pitch and it was like silence. And then someone asked me, so the first question was, did I know any of the Black fashion bloggers? Now, I was one of the first Black fashion bloggers and like the dean, the kind of godmother of like, not just Black blogging, but blogging in general. And so it was like, wow, my first thought was like, this dude didn't even Google me. Like, and then the second question, it wasn't a question, it was more of a statement. I was told that by a white male colleague, he didn't think I would be able to relate to other Black women because I had an accountant. Because a part of my pitch was talking about how much money I was spending each month on hair, you know, being on TV and how expensive it was and stuff like that. And I was so taken aback because this was said in a room of like maybe 75, 80 investors, entrepreneurs, all white men except for my husband. And he was like questioning my ability to connect with the community that I had been part of my entire life. This person who was not even part of the community. And it just really threw me off. And it let me know that it wasn't about the business. I was prepared for questions about, you know, what does your product look like? Tell me about your market cap. What are your unit economics? I mean, all of that. I was like ready for that. And I did not get any of those questions. It was all about me and my identity and questioning even in many ways why I was even in the room. Which was really, yeah.
I was gonna say then, so what would your advice be? Because whenever I hear those stories, I'm like, they're too frequent. But then I know that can be very discouraging to a lot of like young entrepreneurs that are just kind of like, well, I should just give up. Like, if this is a game that I can't even win, you know, I have to be, like I said, I need to be the unicorn of unicorns, you know, the 1% of the 1%. So what would your advice be to other women or minority, or, you know, there are lots of different isms, people who come from the wrong schools or the wrong class or whatever. What would your advice be to anyone who feels as if for some illegitimate reason they're being excluded or underappreciated in those sorts of contexts?
You know, a friend once said to me, she said, you know, realize because you're different, you're the coolest person in the room. They are literally all trying to be like you. And to use the power of that. And so what I say to them is, realize you're the coolest person in the room. At that time, in my mind, I don't have that gene. My husband reminds me, I don't have that gene that tells you, you know, there's a little switch in your brain that tells you not to jump off of bridges and not to do sort of crazy stuff. I don't have that. So for me, when I was receiving this feedback, I was literally counting to 5 in my head so I didn't go off. And I wasn't internalizing it. It was, I can't believe he had the gall to say that to me. Do you know who I am? Like, I am the coolest person in the room. You guys are all doing boring, like, social, you know, networks for dogs. Like, you're doing boring stuff that no one wants to use. This is the most interesting thing that anyone has ever said in this room. And you are all trying to discredit it because you know it's the most interesting thing in the room. And so I would say is, even if you don't believe you're the coolest person in the room, fake it. One of the things I think for entrepreneurs, a really good tool, and this is a piece of advice that I give to companies that I've either invested in or advise, is take an improv class. Take an improv class, take an acting class, because it's going to help you in situations like this. You're going to get tools to be able to either put yourself in a mind frame where you're not being dragged down, or you'll get tools to do sort of yes and, right? So if someone comes back with you with crazy stuff, you'll know exactly how to give it right back to them. And so that would be a tool that I would say, but realize you are the coolest person in the room.
And then I think one of the things that kind of I sometimes struggle with is that, like, if you want to do anything that's not geared towards the 1%, it's all automatically regarded as like charity, right? So like the project that you mentioned, I guess Rihanna's done it successfully and made $300 to $500 million with LVMH. Madam C.J. Walker became the first self-made millionaire because of it. So it's an idea that's tried and true, but like a lot of investors who don't come from those backgrounds just think it must be somehow charitable. Do you think that minorities and women should identify as social entrepreneurs? Because since they think that everything we do is charity anyway, that we can't really do business, is it kind of like a double burden to then say on top of it, I'm trying to do something charitable? Or how should you deal with that proclivity to kind of label everything that a minority person does that targets a minority audience, or not the 1% charity? How do you deal with that? What's your advice for founders?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I remember my family had a series of dry cleaners that we opened about almost 20 years ago now. And I was really, really young, and we had a consultant that we had no business having. We can have a whole conversation about consultants and lawyers and not going down that fee trail. But there was something valuable that he offered, a valuable piece of advice. And it was, build a business and then do the charity. Your success as a business is going to allow you to do more charity. It's going to allow you to control who gets hired, which is much more expensive than writing, one check, a one-off check. You're actually going to employ people. If you come up with certain structures, you can even often offer ownership to your employees, all these things that are wealth building, right? And that was really, really good advice that I have followed, like thinking of it in terms of wealth building, like me building a successful company, and then having the choice of who I work with and choosing to give opportunities to incredibly talented and brilliant Black employees and Black founders, and making sure they're well taken care of and making sure they're paid very well, making sure that they're able to make linkages and things to be able to expand their career. That is how I've seen my sort of role in this sort of social enterprise, social mission. I think for us, knowing that you can do it that way, I think is not an option many Black founders are given real clearly. And so that you can build a good business and then do charity. You can be Robert Smith, right? You can build the big equity fund and make bazillions of dollars and then take it and then pay off the debt of all those people. But Robert Smith couldn't do it until he had a business first that gave him the money to then be able to do that. And so I think for a lot of us, it's not even so much the label of social entrepreneurship, it's that we don't realize that there's other ways in which we can do this. And it doesn't have to start with the charity aspect. We can start with the market-based approach and then take the money that we make from that and then have the impact that we want to have.
And I think that's, really powerful, because I think, when VCs talk about the fact that there aren't that many pipeline businesses, they're talking about there are not that many scalable businesses or businesses that are going to offer interesting financial returns. So being able to say that for some reason, minorities and women don't understand the fundamentals of business as venture capitalists do, it's a kind of easy out. But that's a good segue then to kind of project. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, do you, as someone who's been in the space, do you think venture capitalists even really understand the fundamentals of business? Many are investors, they're not entrepreneurs, right?
I'm going to get to that question, because actually I'm going to get to it now then. which was, do you think that VCs actually have too much power, right? Because
Yeah.
I put this question in after we spoke, because if you look at the numbers, 95% of VCs don't actually offer really good returns, and that's in America. If you go outside of America, the number is even more dismal. So you have a bunch of people that are kind of going around pretending to be experts in something that they may or may not be experts in. What they're expert in is being able to kind of get other people's capital to deploy, not necessarily in building businesses. So I kind of answered the question from my point of view. That's not really a great moderator tip, but what do you think then in terms of VCs? Do they have too much power? I, again, inserting my own point of view in there, believe that the founders should be the core of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Like, we are the core, and everyone else lives and die off of whether or not we generate wealth for them. So how do you think the system needs to be reoriented so that founders become the core again, and that VCs aren't seen as the end all and be all? They're just simply the gasoline that allows you to scale. How do we get to that point?
Yeah, I think that's a really tough question. I think one of, I'm a person who believes that the venture capital system is desperately broken for many reasons, not just even the diversity reasons, even just the structures don't make sense. I think there's a lot of misalignment between limited partners and people who are kind of the investors, quote unquote, in the fund, and general partners who are the, kind of founders, runners of the fund. And so I think the system in general is broken. When you add in this level of, you have people who are making investment decisions in terms of companies, and they've never ran a company themselves. So they really don't understand or know an entrepreneur. They don't know what maybe triggers. They might know academically, they've read, maybe if they've been an investor for a while, they might know a certain pattern, but they actually don't know. And there's something about being an entrepreneur, you have a front row seat to what's going on. Like, I know what it's like to have to lay off people, and what you have to go through in the financial decisions, right? I've had to look at many a P&L and many a balance sheet, right? And read it and make projections and things like that. As investors who have not been in that space really don't have experience doing that. And so you have people making decisions about business that don't understand necessarily business. They understand the investment in it, they might understand the returns, they can do some financial tools and analysis, but they don't actually understand the business. And I think that's one of the roots for the reason why it's not that successful. And so as a founder of color, you have that. You have this person who is desperately trying to impress, their LPs and raise the next fund. A VC is always raising the next fund, right? Because you need the fees, right? And so as a founder of color, you find yourself in this position where it's difficult to get investment based upon the investment opportunity of your idea. It's mostly investment based upon the sort of reputational brand cachet a GP, a fund could get by investing in you. And that's hard because it's not the same money as if someone thought, oh my God, this is a really great idea. It's scalable. I can, put $1 million in, and I think this is going to give me the 10x. It's more like, I really don't think this is going to give me the 10x. So I'm not going to give you the mill. I'm going to give you 100,000 because that's safe for me. And that's what I feel safe. And I can feel really good. And I can say I invested in a person of color and I gave you a little bit of money. It's not enough for you to actually build, but I can say that. And I've seen a lot of founders get in that sort of trap. And it makes it really difficult to succeed because we never get the investment we need to really do it. And we don't get the investment we need to fail, meaning there's such little room for error. Like, if you really need 2 million to scale your company and all you can raise is 300,000, you don't have any room. You have no room to make any mistakes. You have no room to learn, right? You literally have no room to learn, because if you make that one mistake, you're over, you're done. And that's one of the challenges I think comes with the VC space. It's just enough so that people feel good about themselves and sort of assuage some of their guilt, but not enough for us to actually really challenge. And so there hasn't been, at least that I know of, and I'm more than welcome for anybody to please share with me if they can identify this, there hasn't been any Black unicorn exit. And I've been challenged on this for a couple of things, and people will mention like Zoox, which is the automated car service, who has a brilliant Black woman CEO. She came on the CEO in 2019. She wasn't the founder. They will talk about Justin TV, which had Michael Siebel, but Michael Siebel was actually the CEO of a sub company called Social Cam, which did have an exit, but that exit was at 60 million. So and I think Mike is actually a Yale alumni too. Yeah. So there hasn't been the unicorn yet, right? So that model hasn't been proven. I'm not even sure how many have even reached 100 million exit stage. So we're in this very early stage of investing in people of color, and we're still not getting enough to get to the $1 billion unicorn stage, but we're expected to do that. And it's this really strange position.
Well, I think it's kind of like, that's a great transition to your Project Diane 2016, where it's not even that there are no unicorns. I think you found that there were only 12 Black female founders that had raised more than 1 million, and that the vast majority of women, Black female founders, had raised, like, I think it was like $30,000 or $33,000 relative to 1.3 million for failed white male entrepreneurs. So that, as you said, there wasn't, and I think I saw an interview where he said most of the money that Black women were getting was from their 401ks. Yep. So to help us to unpack a little bit the numbers, because I guess you got like a lot of public recognition for that. The Wall Street Journal, everybody basically, I think Melinda Gates, everybody was talking about that report because it was the first one that kind of really analyzed that. Help us understand like why you did the report and what you found. And a corollary question to that is, and do you think things have gotten better? Because now in 2020, everyone is like, oh, George Floyd, we have to help Black businesses. Yeah. Do you believe the hype, or do you think this is kind of a temporary distraction? But first, unpack Project Diane, and then let's go to 2020.
So we did Project Diane mostly because we were trying to start an incubator accelerator program in 2015 that targeted Black Latinx women. It was one of the first to do so. And we were talking with partners, and there was no data. I mean, there wasn't even data at that time on women. Crunchbase, at the time it was like Mattermark, which is a woman-led company that later since ended. No one was collecting data. It was just like startups. Nobody was looking at gender. No one was looking at race. So when we would go to partners and say, it's hard out there for assistant, they would ask, well, how hard? And we literally couldn't tell them. Right? There was no data to quantify it. And so I, had a little break, and my husband, I remember him saying this, don't you have a research degree from Yale? And didn't you graduate kind of at the top of your class? And, we just kind of paid that off. So maybe you want to use that? Couldn't you do this? Don't you know how to do research? That's literally what you went to graduate school for. And I think one of the things I learned out of that is as women, sometimes we tend to look outside ourselves, women and people of color and marginalized folks, for answers when we actually have the answer and capabilities within ourselves. And so I did it with myself and 10 outsourced data collectors. And literally it was done just to almost like a demographic study. We just wanted to count how many. That's all I need to know. And the process, all of this data we found out. The average raise, which we checked so many times, we're that can't be true. But then when I saw anecdotally, that is true. The number who had raised over $1 million at that time, it was 12. And I mean, we searched and we shook every tree. I would have loved to be able to say it was 20, it was 30, it was 12. At the time, there was only about 4 VCs who had actually actively invested in Black women founders. Most Black women founders were raising from angel investors. So it was very few that were actually investing in the founders. We also learned that the top schools weren't Harvard, MIT, and Stanford for Black women founders. It was Howard was the #1 school that was producing the most Black women-led startups at that time. So if you were a VC and you were doing pattern matching, you were doing sort of tracking, and you were only looking at Stanford, MIT, Harvard, maybe Carnegie Mellon, you were missing out on the vast majority of Black women founders. We did an update in 2018, which did show that it's better. And it increased to approximately 34 Black women that have raised over $1 million. And we did this big 2-page spread in Vanity Fair, which was pretty cool, of all the Black women who had raised over $1 million. Kind of sad that it all fit on a 2-page, like, all 34 could fit into one picture, but that was really exciting. And that was literally could be traced to the fact when Project Diane came out, it was almost like the VC industry was shamed and LPs started to ask questions. So when we talk about how do we change this, it's really having LPs start to make demands. I know Yale Endowment, which is one of the biggest endowments, now said, we're going to start asking you questions about diversity. Now, as a potential fund, that says to me, oh my God, I better start thinking about this, because definitely Yale is one of the most active, investors or LPs, and I want to still stay with them. But it was really difficult. And then there's an updated one that's coming out this year. I subsequently transitioned from Digital Divided in June after 8 years, and writing a book and working on my next venture. And I do know with the new Project Diane that's coming out, a lot of it's going to be focused on really identifying what it takes to be successful as a Black woman founder. Like, what are the building blocks? What are the commonalities between those who have successfully raised? There's about now 10 or 12 who raised over 10 million, which is exciting. And we had one Black woman who, Julia Collins, who was the CEO of Zoom Pizza, she's now moved on to something else, who had the first unicorn, not exit, but at least unicorn valuation of a company, which is exciting.
So just to jump into something you just said, sorry to cut you off, is you said people are starting to look at what are the building blocks for success. So what are they? Let's get a sneak preview, because I guess like some people listening now are going to say, okay, so we know the problems, but what should we be doing to make ourselves equipped to be the next, as Beyonce said in Formation, the next Black Bill Gates in the making?
There's a couple of really interesting things. And one of the things I've really pushed back on is what it takes to be a successful woman founder, a successful Black founder, a successful Latino founder is not the same as it takes to be a successful white male founder. And what has happened is, like, what it takes to be a successful white male founder has been set as like what it takes to be a founder, and it isn't. And I'll give a couple of things. One, particularly for Black founders and Black female founders, I would say this is probably true of women founders in general. Having strong family support is a real key for success. And there's 2 quick stories. One is when I moved to Atlanta to build our incubator, we had this opportunity and funding. I was just a nervous wreck because I couldn't find a good nanny for my child. My kid was a baby then, and as any new mother, you don't want to just leave your kid with anyone. Like, it just was not something I wanted to do. And I called my mom, who's living a fabulous life in New Mexico, like living her best retired life, and was like, I need help, and I was crying. And she asked me, do you need me to come? And I thought she was like saying come for like 2 weeks or so. And she's like, no, do you need me to move to Atlanta to help you? And I was like, yeah, I do. I really do. I need your help. If I had to I don't know if I could put a price on that. Like, how would I quantify that sort of help of having someone come and stay? My mother stayed with us for 4 years and helped me with my son, helped me and my husband. And like, what type of price, how would I quantify that help, right? I couldn't. We had a founder in our program who parents were immigrants, Jamaican immigrants. Her father was a bus driver. And she's building a really successful blockchain startup that sort of manages IP rights across music and TV and stuff. And so we had our demo day, and her entire family, when I say it was like 40 people, I'm not joking, and they all had her startup t-shirt on. And her father was like pitching one of the top investors, one of the most active investors here in Atlanta. And like, literally, they were in this conversation. He was like pitching the company. And, the founder was like laughing because she's like, I don't even think he got it right. But like, just the fact that he was like selling the company so hard that this investor later took a meeting, and I believe he later invested in her. because he was like, your father just was like so passionate. Her parents got Ink magazine subscriptions. She's like, they like had people. Now they're reading Ink magazine and sending me cutouts of like what I need to do to like fundraise. And so having family is really important to us, having a community, and not even just biological family. It could be your friends, but having that community is super important. Another building block is hustle. And that is, for a lot of families of color, it takes many steps for us to get into a room with a VC. Not because we're not great, but we don't have access to the same networks. I think it's very similar to someone who finds himself at Yale. It is hard to get into Yale no matter who you are. But if you are a Black student and you find yourself at Yale, you are pretty remarkable, because there's a lot of things that you have to do in order to get here, more than maybe some of your other students had to. And so what we're seeing is people have that hustle, that mentality, that ability to really navigate challenges, who can see opportunities and say, you know, I can see that I can win. Someone once asked me really a poignant question, which was, how did you know you could win? When you started the budget fashionista, and there was absolutely no blogging, nobody was making money on blogging. You wouldn't even know what a blog was in 2002. If we could remember back then, did anyone know what that was? How did you know you could do it? And it was I had to think. I'm like, that's a really great question. I knew I could do it because I saw my parents, particularly my father, take a risk and win. So I knew that you could take a risk and win. I saw that as a child. And so I think for people, one of the things for an entrepreneur is like, have you personally taken a risk and it turned out great? Have you seen someone in your family take a risk and it turned out great? Because many times that doesn't happen for us. Usually it turns the other way. So when you see that it can turn out great, that means that you understand possibility. You can see the possibility. And a lot of times as an entrepreneur, you have to see through a wall. You have to see around the corner in order.
Hello.
We'll give her another minute. Maybe
Yeah, I thought it was me.
No, it's her internet froze. Just bear with us, everybody. We're going to be transitioning to live Q&A here in a moment when we get Kathryn back. She must have had a connection issue, but I love seeing the chat, everybody. Really lively chat and some great questions coming in. So as soon as we get Kathryn back, we'll start to we'll let her finish her thought and then we'll move to Q&A. So Gary, while we're waiting up there, okay, she'll be back in a minute.
She's coming back in.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, you were going to ask me something, Wendy.
Yes. No, I was just going to ask you kind of your reaction to what you've heard from Kathryn so far while we're waiting for her to come back.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty honest. I mean, I think that it is true. I mean, I think that whenever you look at the numbers, 11 or 12 Black women got funded in 2016, or I think there were numbers from this year, there are only 7 Black people in venture capital firms with any sort of decision-making authority, check-writing ability. You start to realize that even though we don't talk about these things, they exist. And the more that we can kind of shed light on the reality, the kind of more distressing it is, but also the more empowering it is. Because I think as long as there are no numbers, people think that you have a chip on your shoulder, you're making it up. And I think it was really brave of Kathryn to actually do the research. So yeah, it's pretty, but I had one more question for her when she comes back. So if you let me,
sure.
because it's kind of hopefully to kind of talk about, well, what's the positive message that we can take out of all of this? So it is not to leave on a kind of depressing note. And I want to say hi to Nicole Ross, who's like one of our friends from London, who I see is asking a question about tactics and strategies or advice that you can give to Black businesses. Yeah, because I guess a lot of people have those sorts of questions.
Okay.
So it looks as if
I'm back.
Kathryn might be back.
Okay, excellent. Welcome back, Kathryn.
We missed you.
So I'm going to go away for a couple minutes while you finish your thought, and Gary has another question. Then we're going to transition to Q&A. So I'm going to go away for a couple minutes.
Q&A.
Awesome. Sorry about
No, so
that. I think
no. That shows that we're doing it in real time. It's live. It's just like
right,
you
it's
know,
live.
it's live.
I usually have like
But
a
I was
whole
gonna
bunch
ask
of
you like,
backup, but I didn't think that
no,
was
no,
gonna happen
no.
today.
Well, I was going to ask you kind of one last question before we
Yeah.
kind of take it on to the audience, or take it over to the audience, which is hopefully on a more optimistic note. It seems as if like 2020, despite being a really kind of sh blank blank year,
Yeah.
there's still some signs of positiveness, right? Because on the one hand, Biden, our president-elect Biden, is saying that if he gets into power, he wants to make more Black and brown fund managers. I think, as we were saying while you were gone, there are only 7 with decision-making authority in the top 100
Yeah.
firms. And we're also seeing like more white allies saying, hey, what can I do? So last question from me, if you could talk to either President-elect Biden or white people out there that say, hey, what can I do? What would your proposal be for how we can kind of turn this around so that we don't have to have another conversation like the one that we just had?
Yeah, during the Obama administration, I was a part of the National Council on Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And on a side note, got to sit next to Andrew Yang, which was very interesting when he ran for president. I'm like, oh my God, I like really know you. And my pitch is the same as my pitch was then, which was there's a couple of quick and easy sort of things that the government can do. One, it's still something to be called to the White House, kind of called to task, right? So there's that. I think on the local and state level, there's a lot even more power with pension funds, which are usually the main LPs in a lot of VC funds. And these pension funds happen to be public employee pension funds. And in big states like California and New York, a majority of public employees are actually people of color. So the irony of these funds not pushing the investment in diversity when it's really the money of diverse people who are funding it is very interesting. So I think at the state level, the pension boards, other folks can really start to speak up, and many have. Endowments like Yale and others saying like, look, if there's not diversity in your team and diversity in your portfolio, we're not going to be interested in it. I think those things are really important. I think the government can act as LPs in some emerging manager funds. Maybe it's not structured necessarily as traditional LP. It could be structured as a loan to the fund or whatever it may be, a small business loan, what have you, to be able to really promote that. So there's different structural things that can be done, both sort of using the bully pulpit, if you will, of the White House, which the Obama administration used very effectively. They would put people like me in a room with, the head of like CalPERT, right, which is a Cal like pension fund, and led to really interesting conversations. And so they can do that. I mean, that's quick and easy.
And what do you think like regular white people can do? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like the white allies, the people who are saying, my eyes have been opened.
Write checks. I mean, that's really what you can do. And I know that's probably not what they want to hear, but I think most successful Black founders have been mentored to death. What we need is sponsors. We know what to do. I mean, you know what to do. Like you don't need a mentor, right? It's really a sponsor and someone to walk through the door and say, give them money. So if you're not able to write the check, particularly at a school like Yale, you know people who can, right? And you walking, I mean, literally taking the hand of that Black founder and walking them in and saying to this person, I want you to fund them. We can't say that. It's obviously up to us to make the pitch and have a great pitch and do those sort of things. But you sitting there with them while they make the pitch, and when you hear the ridiculous questions that come up, because they will, you actually interjecting and saying, that is a stupid question, Bob. Last week we were in a meeting with such and such person and you did not ask him that, Bob. So let's move on, Bob. And you can do that, like really inserting yourself and saying, look, this is somebody we need to fund. I think one story I would say before we turn it over when Donald Trump was elected, I had a number of friends who were sort of in the tech sort of space, really successful, like white guys who reached out to me. And one of my friends was, he just called me, he was like so nervous. And he was just like, I don't know what to do. Oh my God. I'm like, what happened? What can I do? Blah, 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 blah. And I said to him, you have power. You are not powerless. You are a wealthy, Harvard educated white male. You will get into rooms and spaces I will never be invited to. It doesn't matter how great and fabulous I am. You will get into those rooms. So use that power. You can use it. No one's going to be mad at you. When you are invited to a dinner where you know it's going to be all tech bros, invite someone like me to come along and stick with me and make sure that you introduce me to everybody and let everybody kind of know you have the power to do that. And his response was so interesting to me because he said, you know what? I never thought of it that way. I've spent my entire life looking forward and seeing that I'm not Steve Jobs. I never took a moment to look back and see how many other people I was in front of, how many people I was ahead of, how many people I could actually uplift. I never thought about that because I only knew that I wasn't Steve Jobs and I never took a look back. And so I say to white allies, you can do this. You are empowered to do this. Blame George Floyd, blame me, blame Yale, like blame whoever you need to blame if you're not comfortable in taking the agency yourself, but you can do this and we need you to do this. This is the only way it's going to change.
Brilliant. And with that, I'll turn it over to Wendy, who is desperate, I know, to ask some really awesome questions.
You guys, I have to say the questions coming in from the audience are so amazing. And I have to apologize in advance. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, so please don't hate me, but we're going to do our best to chug through as many as we can with Kathryn. Okay, excellent. So Kathryn, I'm going to just pluck some of the most provocative ones here. First, from Nicole Ross, what are some tactics and strategies or advice you would give to Black businesses who are emerging as disruptive companies in multiple industries?
The first advice would be to really know your numbers. Know them backwards and forwards and sideways. And the reason why I say that is that you're going to be challenged on them, particularly if you're innovative and you're successful. People are going to have a little bit of disbelief that you are as great as you say you are. So when they have that, be able to come back with numbers that you can just prove if they need to. Most won't ask you to show proof, but if they do, you'll have it right there. So that's why it's really important to know your numbers. Make sure you understand the business that you're in. I think too, that's really, really important. And don't be afraid to stand by your convictions. Like if you believe that you are building an amazing hair weave company, you're building amazing environmental company. Don't let an investor or funder tell you that you need to go in ping pong machines. I mean, and I've seen that happen before where an investor, because we don't have as much access to capital, will convince a founder that what they're thinking is almost gaslight investment, like gaslighting them in investment of like, well, what you think is right is not right. You really should be doing this over here. And so make sure that you are really clear with your convictions and really clear on what it is that you're doing, because you're going to get people who are going to gaslight invest you and try to get you to do something else or get you to do what they want you to do instead of what you know is right.
So I have a question here from, let's see here, Zanati Man, and I hope I said Zanati's name correctly. Can you list some of the best resources and networks to access for Black women-owned founders? What would you recommend that people consult or use?
Yeah, there's a couple of really interesting ones. I mean, one is Black Women Talk Tech. It's a really interesting network. The organization I founded, Digital Undivided, which is still active and growing, is another great network. There are also some networks that are not necessarily Black women, but are really supportive in building sort of allies and partnerships. The List is an organization. It's like a listserv of successful women. There's also sort of online communities like Ethel's Club, which is an interesting community of creatives of color. I also say Instagram is a really good place to go if you're looking for other communities and people to follow. I would also just kind of browse on Instagram. If you go to any of those organizations and you start to browse who they're following, you start to see them on Instagram, and Instagram's algorithm will make sure that you find others like them. You will start to stumble upon some others too.
Okay, excellent. Here's a great question from Brandy Coates. I'm a Black woman and I would love to invest in startups. I've met some by way of Digital Undivided. However, startups don't have the same level of information as public stocks. How do I, as an investor, make intelligent decisions on how to invest in startups given the dearth of information? What are the factors to consider?
Yeah, so that's a challenging question, because a lot of times with early stage startups, and first, thank you, Brandy, for investing in companies through Digital Undivided, or looking at companies through Digital Undivided. It is hard. That's a hard thing to do in terms of assessing a startup, because by nature, most are pre-revenue. So they don't have the traditional metrics of a business, right? Your traditional businesses, they don't have, SEC filings and things like that you can peruse. So you're really investing in the founder and their ability. What I think when you're new to investing in startups, I always suggest joining an angel group. So Yale Angels is a great start. Astia. If you want to learn more, and a really good program is Pipeline Fellows, which is led by a Latina, Natalie, who is a Yale alumni too.
Oh, it's Pipeline Angels by Natalia Oberte Noguera.
She changed it.
Noguera, Oberte Noguera.
Yeah. It was Fellows now.
She's class of 05, yeah.
And she's a Yale alum. An amazing program that has trained a lot of women investors, and has trained a lot of Black women investors too. Many who have gone on to actually raise funds. So Lorene Pendleton was trained by Pipeline and is now the head of a fund with an organization called Portfolio. There's another interesting organization called SheEO, and it's based in Canada, but they have a cohort here, and it's like you put in $1,000 each month, and you kind of join this cohort in which you invest in kind of companies, you give sort of loans. It's a really interesting sort of format that might be a good way to get started on a lower level.
Mm-hmm.
But angel investors, Pipeline, looking at sort of these communities and starting there so that you have a cohort. I do know Pipeline teaches you how to do assessments. And you also come out with this really close connection and close cohort as well.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Oh, thank you very much, Janine. So I'll repaste that link in case people can't see it. SheEO World. Okay. Thank you, Molly. Okay, here's a question from Giselle Roger. How can U.S. financial regulators and U.S. federal policymakers encourage investment with diverse founders?
Again, that's like a really tough one. I think it's really through some of the things with SBA. So Digital Undivided was a part of a sort of pilot program that the SBA had where we got, I think it was like $50,000 in non-dilutive, pretty easy funding through like a pitch deck, and this really streamlined, simplified program is ran by a gentleman named Nagesh Rao. And that, looking at the data from that, if you can get it, particularly if you're a federal employee or a Congress, you probably can get the data from whether or not that was successful or not. And then seeing if you can expand that would be really, really super interesting. That's one way. So funding that, and that had to be approved by Congress, and giving more funding and authorizing the SBA to give larger chunks than 50,000 is one way that it can happen. And I've seen a lot of vehicles through the SBA as probably the path that's probably the easiest and most direct. I think another way, and something that federal regulators could do, is really figure out how to streamline the process to get federal funds. I mean, the federal grant process is absurd. Like, as an entrepreneur, I just have no desire to go through the layers. And there has to be a simplified way of doing it. And I think that was one of the things they were testing out with the SBA program too, can we do this simple? So yeah, I mean, those would be the sort of easiest things I think you could do, is simplifying the process for federal grants, and then figuring out how to expand some of the programs at the SBA and fund them at a higher level, which do demand congressional approval.
Okay, one more question, and then we're going to have to start closing out here. Molly Zeff asks, we know diverse teams at workplaces create better outcomes and make better decisions. I learned that in Yale SOM classes. How can companies improve their pipelines to diversify their teams?
Well, look at different places. Hire people on your recruiting team who come from different schools. So one of the things that many companies are doing, instead of hiring people from their traditional schools, because a lot of, particularly in tech, they have sort of a set school that they hire from, right? And they look to, look at other schools, look at Howard. Hire a recruiter from Howard, hire a recruiter who's been to an HBCU, so they have an idea of what that talent is looking for. Go to things like Afrotech, which is a massive, very successful tech conference that's targeting Black techies. And a lot of people recruit there and recruit quite successfully there. You know, open up your networks, look at different places, go to different places. I feel like some companies don't go because they're afraid they're going to be uncomfortable, because and you probably are. You are not, you're going to be a minority in that room. You are. But that's the sort of thing you have to do if you want to expand your pipeline and network. You're going to have to look at different places.
Okay, excellent. All right, give me 1 second, you guys, and then unfortunately, I'm going to have to close the show down. Actually, let me grab one more question.
Okay, that's fine. I can answer one more. Yeah.
Okay, I try to stick to the budget of time here, but here is another question that came in from Janine Hegner. Given this discussion about unicorns, VCs, and $1 million plus funding rounds, should the goal be to succeed that way, or should building a sustainable business that supports employees in the community be a perfectly good goal? What do you think?
You know, that's a really interesting question. I think for a long time we had this sort of shareholder capitalism mentality that we're just going to make the most we can for the least number of people, for only the owners. And I think if anything we've learned from 2020, that's not sustainable. That we have to start to really think of the more stakeholder model of capitalism, which means it's not just the owners we care about, it's the employees, it's the customers, it's the community where the company exists. All of those things become important. And so I would say if you're a founder who's building right now, focus on the stakeholder, because that is sustainable and that is the long-term view. The shareholder mentality of raising as much money as you can and scaling and growing rapidly and not caring about what happens is really short-term. And it's where we're at. It's why social media is so toxic. It is why we're divided. It's because people scaled and didn't think of the stakeholders and the impact that this was going to have on a larger scale and the long-term impact of some of these technologies.
All right, cool. All right, you guys, I'm very sad to say that we have to close everything down, but I just wanted to thank everybody who joined us this evening. Thank you for joining us tonight to engage in this discussion. And I have a few other people I've got to thank. First of all, I want to thank Gary for stepping up and moderating this evening, and Kathryn, a million thank yous. Your voice is so important. We really appreciate your honesty and your frankness here. So we want to also thank again the Yale Black Alumni Association, the Yale Latino Alumni Network, and Yale Women for co-sponsoring tonight's event, and the Yale Alumni Association shared interest groups for making this event possible. A recording of tonight's webinar will be posted on the Accelerate Yale LinkedIn page, Facebook page, and our YouTube channels. And everybody who registered for tonight's webinar will receive a recording, and Gary, you and Kathryn, you also will receive the recording. Awesome. We do have 2 more webinars planned for December. I have to get my you-know-what in gear to get the word out, but here they are. December 9th, we'll speak to Brian Wallach, who is Yale class of '03. He is the founder of IMALS. He's going to be talking about his entrepreneurial journey and how he built and scaled a huge nonprofit in a very short amount of time. And on December 15th, Sandra Daniels, the founder of Thumbtack, will be here with Accelerate Yale and Gary to talk about how he built a unicorn. So that's it for tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And Kathryn, big thank you to you especially. Okay, good night, everybody. Bye. And end.